going to record this. And then I'll post this video in the presentation after the fact, so you can see it later. I forgot it was Planning Commission night.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, thanks. Okay, so I have a informational presentation here. It's quite a few slides. There's a lot of information, but that's the purpose of this meeting, is to sort of kick off the public portion of this study. We've been working on it a while, but let me find the right screen here. So this is Fair Lake study. This is phase 2. I'll get into that in a second. Here's the agenda for the meeting. Just introduction to the study, background information on the area, and then I'll explain this later, but some of this, getting into the study content after that. And then just really quick sort of intro for those of you who may not be quite as familiar with what we do here in the comprehensive planning part of Fairfax County Department of Planning and Development. So the comprehensive plan is it's required of every locality in the state of Virginia to have a comprehensive plan, and it provides a holistic vision for the future of the county and helps us manage growth and change. It's our long range future plan. It includes policy goals and objectives, physical planning of land uses and related infrastructure, usually at about at least a 20 to 25 year time horizon, if not longer. And the plan provides recommendations for how land can be used in the future, how and where growth is going to be accommodated, and also for the protection of environmental and cultural resources and things like that. It's not a regulatory document, but it's used by county staff and the elected officials to guide land use decisions across the communities of Fairfax County. And then all of that is implemented by the zoning ordinance, which is the regulatory document. The comprehensive plan sets the vision. And the comprehensive plan itself is made up of several different elements. There's a policy plan that contains countywide land use policies and guidance, and there's several plan maps that graphically convey different aspects, such as the planned transportation network and trails networks. And then there are several area plan volumes, and those provide more specific land use guidance for individual planning areas in the county. That includes area-wide guidance and then some very site-specific recommendations in there as well. This is what you see when you go to our DPD comprehensive planning website, and it illustrates how to navigate through the plan to the study area. In this case, the Fairfax Center area is one of many special planning areas that have their own specific plans. And other suburban parts of the county are divided into plan areas and plan districts. This image shows the concept for future development map, which is an essential element of the comprehensive plan. That serves as a framework. It translates the countywide policies to the more specific area plans. The concept includes several categories of higher intensity development nodes throughout the county, and we call those our activity centers. And that's where the majority of future growth is intended to occur. And the remaining suburban and lower density areas of the county are planned to largely maintain their established character. And Fairfax Center is designated as a suburban center, which is the category that were intended to be employment-based mixed-use centers, largely planned around office uses. And this was all back in the late 80s, early 90s when this concept was established. The plan guidance for the Fairfax Center area, that's located in the Area 3 volume of the area plans, but the majority of Fair Lakes which is what we're dealing with today, is located in subunit E1 of the Fairfax Center area. So there's a Fairfax Center area plan. It's broken up into all these subunits, and I'll get a little more into that plan in a bit. And then there are several ways that the comprehensive plan can be amended over the years. There's area-wide or small area studies, which is what we're doing with this. And there's site-specific plan amendments, which we have a process every couple of years now where folks can make nominations for changes to the plan, usually for kind of specific sites. And that's how this study originated. It was back in 2023. There was several different nominations for sites in the same little portion of Fair Lakes, all kind of asking for the same thing. And so we decided it would be good to look at it more holistically and do a study of the whole area rather than looking at them individually, which gets us to the study itself. So it was also authorized in April 2023 through that site-specific process, but it was authorized as a study. And then it was reauthorized later in that year to break it into two phases. There was one or two of the sites that were already moving forward with rezoning applications and needed to move forward at a quicker pace than this study. It took us a couple of years to really get rolling with this study, largely due to the fact that when you start studying a larger area, we have to do more holistic transportation analysis, and that requires resources and funding. And it took us a while to get that in place. So there was a phase one. This is phase two. Phase one was completed last year, and it ended up adding one more site-specific option to the current plan. And we did a few minor editorial revisions to the subunit E1 text, but we're taking a more of a look at that now. So the underlying issues for the study is there's development pressure and interest for some additional residential potential in Fair Lakes. There's a lot of, like I said, Fair Lakes was originally envisioned as an office-based center. It ended up a little more retail heavy, but there's still quite a few office uses. There's also a lot of approved or planned office that never got built. And according to the plan as it is now, it never really supported residential was intended to be a secondary use. And so there's always been an obstacle there to increasing residential beyond a certain threshold. The plan was to keep it more employment based. But now the office market has changed and there's less demand for office uses. So we needed to kind of rethink the mix of uses out there. So as of now, the plan as it is largely built out or entitled out, and there's not really any potential to do any additional residential in that area for one thing. And then the existing Fair Lakes office buildings are getting 40, 50 years old, and they may be in need of either reinvestment or redevelopment. Like I said, the adopted plan is already fully entitled, which I'll explain a little bit. Let's see. And the intent of the study is just to update the plan. It's been about 20 years since it was last looked at really holistically, and to provide for the development needs of the next 20 years, and including the land use mix. We want to consider the future of the office market there, just determine an appropriate level of planned growth and intensity, define and reinforce the desired character, and as always, ensure adequate planned infrastructure to support the land uses. And so the process has been broken down into 4 stages. Stage 1 was existing conditions and baseline analysis, and we've been working on that over the last couple of years since it got authorized. So that's pretty much done. Now we're in stage 2, which is looking at the Fair Lakes. There's a vision and goals in the plan. That's sort of the framework for the plan, the strategic framework. So I wanted to start with that and revisit that if we need to, and amend that as necessary. And then the next stage will be what I sort of call the implementation strategy, which gets into the actual nuts and bolts of the land use alternatives. And there's design guidelines and other aspects in there too. But I think the first stage is to get the strategic part, look at it from that perspective. And then the last stage will be just the staff report and public hearing process. This is just sort of a timeline of those, just really to show the outreach plan. So we started the community outreach with a survey, which hopefully we had quite a good turnout for the survey, which was in June, to gather community input and feedback. And then there's also a group we put together of around 10 or so of the commercial property owners in those office areas, especially in Fair Lakes. We met once we want to make sure we get their feedback and they understand the market there and what the market situation is and what's feasible and practical and what their desires are, because those are primarily the areas we're going to end up looking at, it seems like. So we're sort of having a parallel process of community meetings like this one, and then the commercial group just getting a different set of input from that stakeholders. But then staff will sort of synthesize the input, and then there'll be more opportunities along the way here for public input. Oh, and we do have an email list, which we have a website too on the DPD the overall DPD website. You have to look for current plan amendments or studies, or else hopefully I can send a link to whoever. Probably most of you are on that email list, hopefully. But there's an email list. I'll give you my contact information later if you need to get on it. Okay, just some brief history. So Fair Lakes was planned starting in 1980 or so. Actually, that was when the Fairfax Center area, original Fairfax Center area plan was developed, which was kind of a future-looking, groundbreaking kind of plan of the day, sort of like the Tyson's plan of the day. At that point, Fairfax Center was envisioned as being kind of like the economic hub of the county, and Fair Lakes was envisioned within that plan, and then so it was planned in 82 and then started development, I believe, and was zoned in 84 originally for 5 million square feet of sort of office space mixed use development, which if you're up on planning lingo, that was designated in FAR, which is floor area ratio, but at this point, it's about 5 million square feet of development. And that recommendation remains in the plan as sort of, it's called the overlay, but at the time in 1980, the base plan was pretty much existing zoning in Fair Lakes, and then the overlay plan was the sort of options, the development options. But at this day and age, those have all been, original options have been built out, but they're still called the overlay recommendation, but it's kind of like the base at this point, which is a little confusing. But and the Fairfax Center plan emphasizes things like architectural excellence, preservation of natural features, and all those great things. And by the 2000s, the original plan was largely built out. And here you can see aerial views from 1980 through the early 2000s of how it built out. And then in 2006, so that the original plan recommendation was already entitled and mostly built, and there was development pressure back then similar to today. There was several site-specific proposals that came in through what we called the APR process, the area plans review at the time, and they were combined into a similar study in 2006. And that ended up in 6 site-specific options being adopted into the plan. So they're specific to those sites in red. And you can see the picture of this pretty intense high-rise type of development. It was meant to be infill in sort of parking areas of the existing office buildings. And they were entitled by rezonings, but those were never built right away. So they were entitled, but never realized. In retrospect, I would imagine a lot of that might have to do with that parking being needed for the existing office uses. It's expensive to replace parking in that way. But whatever the case, so those remained in the plan unbuilt for over a decade. We get to 2017. 4 of those 6 options were under single ownership, and there was a plan amendment to combine those, basically to give flexibility for them to relocate onto other sites and be developed in different ways than was originally entitled, since that was no longer feasible. So it didn't change the use mix, but it allowed some flexibility. 2 of the options remain site-specific. But as part of that, there was some new guidance added to the subunit E1, which is the area we're dealing with. We're calling that Fair Lakes for the purposes of this study because that's the real core portion of Fair Lakes. There's a few other subunits that are part of the original rezoning area, but those are residential neighborhoods, and it's just simpler to keep it to this one subunit. But as part of that plan amendment, there was redevelopment guidance added to guide as those rezonings came in. So there was a vision and design guidelines and aspects like that, which set the stage for the future. And then, so this is phase one of this study. So this is last year. What we did, like I said, we took some of that vision and design guidelines text and we just kind of rewrote it a little bit to make sure that it applied to all redevelopment moving forward. It was originally just sort of written for those particular options. And then there was one new site-specific option for residential development on this site shown here. So that was just approved last year. Okay, so that gets us to today. This is probably one of the more complicated slides of the day, but it's here nonetheless. This shows the state of the plan, sort of quantification wise today. What exists out there, there's 5.8 million square feet. The adopted plan, what's important, there's still 1.7 million square feet that remains unbuilt of what is planned and entitled. So pretty much all the plan intensity is already entitled by rezonings. But like I said, some of those were never built, but they're sort of locked up in these entitlements. So they're not available for other folks to use for any kind of redevelopment. But they could be through zoning actions and stuff, they could be, if the plan supports it, they could be reutilized as planned potential. And see, a lot of that is office potential, and that's the problem today is there's no demand for new office buildings. So there's at least 600,000 square feet of approved office that is probably never going to get built. So we need to kind of revisit some of that and determine what the course forward for that is. There's a little bit of residential potential still there, but so that's right now it's located in a area that's serves as parking for another office use. So okay, so existing conditions. So this is just how the existing uses lay out today, red being retail, orange being residential, and so on. And the mix is about 42% residential. So that's sort of been part of, and I think if you consider the whole rezoning area, which is some of those other, couple of those other subunits, it's closer to 50%. And that was sort of the hesitancy in the past was to uh, planning staff and everyone were hesitant to increase the residential beyond 50% and have it be the primary use without actually replanning it. It wasn't consistent with the plan as it was written. Okay, so there's 2,000 or so existing residential units. You can see the numbers here, like 400 townhomes, 1,500 multifamily units. And then retail areas, 1.2 million square feet. So a lot of that's the big box, but there's a fair amount of strip retail, convenience retail, restaurant. Many of you already know this, but so office inventory, there's 12 total office buildings in these different areas. The star system, there's this company called CoStar, which provides market data for office and other uses nationwide. So I did market research using CoStar, and they have a star system for scoring the sort of quality of market buildings. It goes up to 5. I'm not sure. 5 is probably a pretty high bar, but many of these buildings are 4-star. There's some other ones that are 3-star, which kind of just gives an idea of the sort of market standing of those buildings. And there's 6 parking structures in there. Here's some information on vacancies in the office vacancies. So this is over the last, since 2016 to 2025. So I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but the chart on the left is all of Fair Lakes. And you can see it's been up and down in the sort of 30% range for the last, decade up until it spiked in the last year. That's largely because there's one large office building that just became vacant at the beginning of I think at the beginning of 2025. So just recently. So that sort of made the number spike. And you can see these different office areas. Office area 1, which is the Northrop Grumman site, there's 2 buildings there. And one of those has been vacant this whole time. It's been vacant for many, many years, but the other one has been occupied. So that one's sort of maintained that it works out to a 40% for the combination of the two. Office area 2, which is the main office park, like I said, that's been, less than 20% up until fairly recently. It's been climbing, and then you see that one big spike. So office area 3, which is south of Fair Lakes Circle, there's basically two big office buildings there. They have not had quite as much vacancy. And then office area 4 up in the northeast overall has low vacancies. There was one period there with some vacancies. So there is a rising trend in vacancies, but some of these large one tenant buildings can really have a big impact. This is a little complicated looking too. This is a CoStar data on the whole Fairfax Center area, including, the mall and the government center. I was just pointing out that, so they have a DC area report, and they have, in the whole DC region, there's 82 different office submarkets. And these are all the ones that are in Fairfax County. And so Fairfax Center, as far as the square footage of office in Fairfax Center as a whole, we're looking at like 7.8 million square feet, which is ranked 22nd out of 82. So it's kind of up there, and but then as we saw, there's only 1.2 million or something in Fair Lakes. So really, I think the government center is a big chunk of that, and there's some other, but Fair Lakes is just a part of that. But I thought this was interesting. And then the vacancy rate, 20%, so that's 62 out of 82, with the higher numbers being more vacancies. So it's kind of on the high side, although not the highest, but and you can see here some. So anyway, thought that was interesting. I threw this in here. I got a memo from our heritage resources planners in their department who there is interest in there's a survey coming up, postmodern architecture survey, to look at some of these older office buildings in mid-century kind of, or it's later than mid-century, but there's at least an acknowledgement that there was some of that is interesting and, notable architecture, including the Fair Lakes One building, and even the Stonecroft condominiums got some awards back in the day. So, and that was an essential element of the Fairfax Center plan and Fair Lakes is to try to have some kind of architectural excellence. So they did to some extent. And let's get into some other existing conditions. These are just maps showing the existing trail network on the left and sidewalks on the right. We'll get more into this later in the study as far as things that can be done to improve this network, but this is a reasonable network to work from here, so that's good. Just some various pictures of, these are all the sort of character elements that make Fair Lakes what it is, including the tree cover, which is an important element, especially the buffers along the parkways and the roadways, and the sort of green suburban feel. Just hydrology. This map just shows the different drainage divides, but the point here is that the stormwater, the pond system that's out there was a stormwater system designed with the development, so it does provide stormwater management for all of Fair Lakes, or the original development, and that was even back then. The original development, it was providing treatment to the Chesapeake Bay standards, which must have been pretty new back at the time. There might be some different requirements now, but it did provide pretty good treatment for the day. There might need to be some maintenance with those ponds, but they do still serve a purpose, and they provide passive recreation and serve as amenities. And they are protected by a variety of different, the green stripes here are resource protection areas, which is a sort of protection under the Chesapeake Bay regulations, the sort of orange or the brown orange color, that's wetlands, and there's some actual floodplain in there a little bit. So there's those areas. The point is they're protected by a variety of mechanisms here. So those will remain as they are. This is just showing there's two different sub sewer sheds. This all the sewage from Fair Lakes. The black arrows are the sort of outflow points where it goes into other pipes. So they go into two different sub sheds, but they all end up in the upper Occoquan treatment area. There's actually no public parks, official public parks in Bear Lakes. There are those stormwater areas, which yes, it provides some kind of natural areas and passive recreation. Uh, and we do have an urban parks framework now, which guides development in activity centers such as this. It wasn't in effect at the time this was developed, but according to that, there's like standards for how much parkland per resident and per employee. According to that, there should be about 5 acres of parkland of local parks for the Fair Lakes population and employment. So that would include different plaza areas, sort of passive parks, different elements, just to give you an idea of what the standards are. And this is the map from the Fair Lakes League of existing amenities. There's a couple of tennis courts, a basketball court. It looks like there's some that maybe aren't there anymore. So I think there is also, according to the parks framework, there's a need for some additional active recreation facilities, as we move forward. So that's the kind of thing we can plan for the next 20 years to improve some of those amenities. This just shows the local bus routes that connect. There's some bus coverage. School capacities, I know that's an issue with at least some people in the survey. And we do see some capacity issues with the high school and the middle school. Here, like I said, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but the school year 24-25 there, Catherine Johnson Middle School is a little over capacity. And you can see they work in these 5-year time frames. Basically, they're looking ahead for the next capital improvement plan for 5 years. So both the high school and the middle school are projected to be over capacity. So that's something that needs to be dealt with at some point. If we're talking additional development in this area, it may not happen in 5 years, but it's going to be, eventually it's going to happen. So I'm trying to coordinate with the schools and try to get a little more idea of their long range plans, because most of their planning that's at least out there in the public is for the 5-year time frame. But we need to be thinking farther ahead than that, I think, and there's other plan studies going on in the Fairfax Center area as well. So that's something that's on our radar that we need to ensure is addressed. So bear with me here. I'm this is the adopted plan. So as I mentioned, Fairfax Center area, that's got its own plan. So the pink areas are the suburban center, which is the mixed use activity center, and the darker red, that's the area around the mall and the government center and Fairfax Corner. That's where there's a planned metro station in the future. It's probably beyond 20 years out at this point. It wasn't always that far out, but that seems to be. So the idea was the most intense development in the Fairfax Center area would be in that core area around a half-mile radius of the metro station, and then it would taper out. From there, there is another planned metro station. It's Stringfellow Road, but it was always envisioned as a commuter station, and there wasn't really development planned around it. We may need to rethink that in the future, but at this point, it's kind of so far out that doesn't seem relevant to try to plan, and it's really not too feasible to plan around that station, being it's residential neighborhoods mostly at this point. So there may need to be some discussion long-term with, is that the right location for that, or how we should deal with that? But it didn't seem relevant at this point in time to try to plan Fair Lakes around that necessarily. So it might be in the future, but so anyway, as far as the Fairfax Center plan, Fair Lakes, it's not part of the core area, but it was envisioned to be a secondary node of activity, mostly employment-based originally was the idea. It was, like I said, envisioned mostly as office park, and the retail part wasn't really part of the vision, but it turned into that, which is fine. And there's area-wide guidance in Fairfax Center that includes, planning principles about high-quality design, multimodal connectivity, recreation opportunities, and nice place to live, work, play, and all that kind of thing. And then there's this whole implementation strategy of that overlay district I mentioned. And to get to those higher levels of intensity, you would have to provide commensurate facilities and amenities. So that's what, like when Fair Lakes was developed, that's, that whole road network of Fair Lakes Parkway, Fair Lakes Circle, all that was part of that, the trade-off for all that development is to provide all the infrastructure and the pond system and all those things. So there's always sort of high standards expected. Okay, as far as Fair Lakes itself, what we have now is there's a little introductory section. Then there's the vision, which I mentioned from 2017. It's sort of roughly broken down into a vision statement, goals, and there's these redevelopment formats and areas. And I surrounded that. That's what we'll be thinking about at this point. That's where we're at in the study, is thinking about this vision. And then there's the next stage, we'll be getting into the implementation strategy, which is more of the, like I said, the detailed guidance. So, but I'll briefly explain. And these, if you read the plan, like I said, so if you navigate to our comp plan to the Fairfax Center area, look for subunit E1. There's a number of pages of guidance, and a lot of this is written sort of in narrative format, but I parsed it out into what I consider these guiding principles, which there's an emphasis on mix of uses with office, residential, and retail, network of trails, lakes, parks, plazas, all of these things you can see here. Architectural excellence, preserving natural features, uniform signage and lighting. So these are the guiding principles. And then also there's sort of with the redevelopment guidance in there, there's what I call redevelopment goals, which the way it's written now is preserve and enhance the area, as a high quality destination. So a lot of these are about sort of strengthening and preserving. The transform one here, that's the one that invites the most change, I guess, as far as redevelopment, especially back even in 2017, but especially 2006. The idea was to transform some areas into more urban mix of uses with higher density concentrations of land use, make it more pedestrian friendly and sense of place. And there's always been an acknowledgement of protecting the existing residential areas and neighboring residential areas, protecting them from impacts. Okay, and as far as now, there's these redevelopment areas defined here, which, so this was in the context of the options that were already in the plan. And so the redevelopment areas in red at that time, it says those were the most likely to change. I think that's a little different now. So we're going to rethink these a little bit. The purple areas are the existing residential neighborhoods, which weren't envisioned to change. But between the red redevelopment areas and the blue opportunity areas, those are both areas that were open to development. Either they're envisioned as infill development. I think maybe they're envisioning a little more urban in the sort of retail areas and a little more of sort of infilling with single uses in the office areas. And but there's, as far as what could go where, it wasn't a huge amount of difference between the two areas, just a little bit different vision. So we're going to rethink those a little bit. Okay, but first of all, I'm going to skip, and I hope you're sticking with me here. There's a lot of information, but So we did this community survey in June. It was open for a month, and we got results from that, which I think are interesting. There's a lot of information here as well, but this is all important. This is our original, or this is our initial input from the community, and we had over 600 participants, which I thought was really good. And I was able to break it down. The first question I had in there was about your role in the area. Like, what is your role? Do you consider, are you a Fair Lakes resident? Do you live nearby? Worker? So I was able to break the statistics out by group here just to get an idea of how different population groups are answering the questions. And you'll notice that their nearby residents was the biggest group of 370 almost. So if you're looking at just overall results, it's kind of skewed towards the nearby residents because there was more of them. But by looking at the different groups individually, you can parse it out a little more than that. And there's a little bit of overlap between some of the categories. Like I said, there was 7% of the Fair Lakes residents who also work there. And let's see, the commercial segment, there wasn't a huge amount of responses, but they're about half owners and half tenants. And the residential segment was 80% owners, 20% renters. So we had some questions about identity and character. So hopefully this isn't overwhelming here, this chart, but if you look at it, it's basically looking at the same information for each individual group. This is what elements most contribute to existing identity and character. But the takeaways are that I think for everyone, retail uses contribute most to the existing identity of the place. But also important are the street trees and buffers, mature trees and open space, trails and walkways. Commercial stakeholders rated residential uses a little higher than the natural areas, but so existing character, it makes sense. The retail is very important, but the natural areas and everything are as well. What elements would you like to see more of? Here, I think it's pretty much agreement on a lot of these quality of life elements like trails, walkways, ponds and open space, and the street trees were rated really highly among all groups. So that's, there was desire for some more retail and things like that, but a lot of it was quality of life and all those character elements. There was some open-ended questions, on what aspects contribute. I just picked a few out here. There was quite a few answers, but just the mix of the different uses balanced with the nature, landscape, and open space, convenient shopping, the quiet suburban feel. Some folks thought it was a bit corporate feeling. It's clean and well maintained, and people like to shop, eat, and walk in Fair Lakes. As far as land use, mix intensity, ranking the importance of land uses in the future vision. So neighborhood, retail, and commercial ranked highest for every segment, actually, followed by the regional retail. And then medium density residential scored pretty high with a little less support for higher density residential. And office and employment uses scored higher than higher density residential. And then I asked, these are land bays, which is how the original rezoning area was divided. So that's where these numbers come from, but these different identified land bays. So that seems like a good way to organize the question here, just to ask what type of redevelopment would be appropriate in these different areas. So land bay 2, which is largely residential, but there's the big office use. So this one's makes the results a little unclear for this because it can be kind of unclear whether someone is answering from the residential perspective or the office, but there's overall support for maintaining existing development, which makes sense especially for the residential. But I think the office uses there seems to be support too for rethinking those, converting either to residential, or there was a desire for some local amenities as well. And then there's some different ideas here. There were some comments that reappeared in different land bays, like there was desire for athletic facilities and family-friendly activities. And so some of these are applicable to more than one area. And at least one person, if not more, thought that we should encourage residency in the existing office buildings rather than looking to tear down and redevelop them, and maybe adding some amenities that would help support them. Let's see. So land bay 3, which is all residential, there's pretty broad support here just to maintain the existing development, which makes sense for these residential neighborhoods. Land bay 4, which is the retail center, so all segments except the commercial stakeholders value maintaining the existing type and level of development. Commercial stakeholders favor a little more significant redevelopment. So some folks thought, it could be modernized, or and there's quite a few comments that thought there could be some more, the amenities could be improved in that area, like more places to sit or gather, or pass it, connect in there better, and provide more of a sense of place. But overall, we'll get into that maybe too in a little bit here. That overall, there's less desire to rethink this area. That those businesses are pretty successful for the time being, and probably for the next 20-year period. There's not a huge impetus to really significantly change that area other than to improve it and keep it vital. So land bay 5, so these areas, these office-based areas are our biggest challenges at the moment. Uh, with them being older and the market for those properties not being as strong as it once was. I think there's demand for new office and office near transit, but less demand for some of these older office parks. So there's support for redevelopment, although there is also some support for maintaining existing employment uses, especially by the workers who work there. And you can see commercial stakeholders and Fair Lakes residents favored a little more moderate redevelopment, whereas visitors and nearby residents were favoring a little higher intensity. There's not really consensus here on exactly what this area should be, so this is kind of an area we need to look at more closely for sure. Land base 6, this is another one that's split between retail and office. So support for redevelopment, but that might be, well, there's already redevelopment happening at the enclave, the townhomes. And then I think there's consensus that this office area, if it needed to redevelop, could be, residential that was in keeping with the surroundings would be a good option. So it's not too controversial. Land base 7, which is the shops at Fair Lakes. There's some support for redevelopment here, although support for maintaining. So that's where there was already, just last year, like I said, that one site, it was an option for that site to redevelop. So it's already, and there's a self-storage that was just built. So there's some redevelopment happening in there. Overall, I think it's the shops portion, I think it's fine the way it is. There could be a little bit of room for redevelopment there, but it's not one of our areas of most focus at this point. But so office areas, which are sort of our biggest challenge at this point in time. I also asked about those. What would be the most preferred option in those areas? So here, I said office area 1, there's consensus that residential could be good here, although a little bit difference on the type or level of density. Like I said, the commercial stakeholders favor a little higher density, while some other segments a little lower. So, like I said, some people mentioned school capacity as a concern, which we need to address. And there's desire to focus on some more recreational community areas. There's ideas like, possible outdoor gathering areas, venues, things like that. And I think overall we see this a lot. There's a lot of folks want additional neighborhood retail and small businesses. Office area 2, there was still support for maintaining existing office uses, but then as an alternative, there's also support for medium to high density residential in that area as well. So or there could even be commercial-based redevelopment. That's why I said there's not really consensus here on, I think something needs to happen, but it's a little more openness to what that ends up being, which is what we're going to address in this study, hopefully. And there's comments about, maintaining the lakes and trees, school capacities, possible new school location. I don't know. I've raised that to the schools, just, ask if there's any need for around here since the school capacity issues, but haven't heard back yet. So I'm not sure if there's what their plans are for the future. Let's see. And finally, office area 3. There was favor, some of the stakeholders are commercial stakeholders are favoring some medium to high density residential. We did have a proposal here as part of the site specific amendment process for residential building in that parking area there, but so there's some interest in that. But I also think that those commercial uses there are fairly successful at the moment, and there's not much desire to mess with those much. I guess it's not highlighted on here, but the Coles and the Dix area, which is not part of the office area, there has been some thoughts that could be a possible new node of activity, and like the East Market development could be expanded in that direction. That would be a good place if we wanted to create another sort of node of activity in that area. So that's something to consider. And office area 4, we talked about this before. There's good consensus there for low to medium density residential that kind of is in keeping with the neighboring area. And I didn't include too much here, but I think, like I said, 38% of respondents considered the existing recreational opportunities adequate. So I think there's consensus that there could be more there. And same with public amenities, not quite as low of a response. 63% thought the roadway network was adequate, at least at current development. It can be busy around the retail areas. But as if there's more development in the future, we need to study that for sure. But it can be scary to cross as pedestrians, and there could be more bike ped facilities. So that gets through that. Like I said, we have this commercial group. This will be really brief here. A few weeks ago, we met the first meeting for the commercial group. I'll include a little summary. That was just to get the feedback from those owners as to what their needs are and challenges. So some of the comments, basically the dynamics have changed since the original Fair Lakes plans, and the owners need ability to be able to respond to market conditions. And there's a need to reinvent density that there's already density built and entitled there that could be reinvented to other uses. But it's got great bones, good place to start with. And like I said, I think there's consensus that the retail areas are largely successful as is. There could be some improvements in those areas, but probably not significant change in the next 20 years. So our primary focus should be on those office areas. The future is for more walkable, and there's also a desire to maintain at least some, we need to maintain a mix of uses and not think we don't necessarily want it to go 100% residential, but continue to be a mixed use center. But that's, the challenge there is how do we maintain some office employment and make it more marketable and more desirable, maybe by integrating some other uses in there with it. Because one element of office uses is that they require, folks want amenities and other parks and amenities and things like that nearby. So, and some specific comments on specific areas like Fair Lake Circle, that seems like the main redevelopment area to focus on. Like I said, there's some ideas about maybe East Market retail sort of expanding. It would need to differentiate itself though from Fair Lake Center and Fairfax Corner, and not compete with them too directly, like have its own identity. There could be some potential on Shops Lane. The Northrop Grumman site, it sounds like I said, that one of those 2 buildings has been vacant for decades. The other one, it sounds like they only have a couple of years left on their tenancy there, and they're probably not going to renew. So I think that site seems well suited for some kind of redevelopment, unless someone comes in and all of a sudden wants to maintain the office there, because that's big one tenant buildings, which are a little hard to keep going. And it's not very good for retail at that location because of the setback from the road and the proximity to residential. So, okay, so this is getting into where we are at this point in the study. Like I said, looking at, so we talked about those development areas and formats and how they're a little bit out of date. So this was my concept for what I'm calling planning areas, sort of how to redefine those areas. We obviously have residential neighborhoods, which I think aren't intended to change in the next 20 years. So that's pretty straightforward. We have the retail area, retail center, and the neighborhood mixed use, which, like I said, we're not going to focus on. It doesn't sound like anyway as primary redevelopment areas. There could be a little potential in there for things to reinvent themselves and to happen, or for improvements to happen, but it's not going to be a major local area for redevelopment. I think the focus needs to be on these dashed areas, which are the office redevelopment areas. And there's, like I said, there's unbuilt plan options that are already there. They may need to be rethought as far as those approved office uses may not be viable anymore, but there's intensity that was already planned there, that, you know, the infrastructure was already kind of planned for, that can be reinvented. And there may need to be some additional potential in there to make it work. That's what we have to determine. And like I said, there could be additional node of activity over there or something along those lines. So this is where I guess we can go ahead, and I want to get into the principles and goals and things too, but I could open it up and see if anyone wants to comment just on this aspect as far as just the organizational framework here and the idea of just focusing on those office-based redevelopment areas for most of this study. And I was going to explain that after this a little bit, but the next portions of this study will be getting into, like I said, considering some different redevelopment scenarios for these areas. So right now I'm sort of just defining the areas of focus, and then the next couple of slides after this will be thinking about the goals for redevelopment and the principles we want, so if anyone has any comments now on just the geography here, I guess that this would be a good time for that. And I haven't been keeping track if there's no other comments, I guess, or there may not be. If there's not, I could keep moving, but I'll give a chance for anyone to, I guess, yeah. How do you raise your hand on here on Zoom?
Yeah, Mike, I was going to mention that. And my name is Graham. I work with Mike in DPD. The way that people can jump in here would be to go to the React button. And when you click on React, which is the little heart symbol down in the ribbon, that'll bring up a thing called raise hand. And that just helps us maintain a little bit of order if there are a couple of people that wanted to speak at the same time. So feel free to raise your hand if you have any comments.
And we could always come back to this too. So I guess I can, I don't see anything yet. So let me get back to, so I just have a few slides here. So this is just restating, these are the principles and the goals that I showed earlier. These are from the adopted plan. So these are the elements, I think, just as guidance if we want to rethink any of these things. So a lot of these are still applicable. There's a lot here to kind of try to remember, but it was just the next slide here kind of shows, let's see, I'll go through these, I guess, but things like architectural excellence, the trails, lakes, parks, the redevelopment goals, a lot of it, like I said, preserving the character of the place, transforming into an urban mix. I guess that might still be depending on what we determine for another activity node. Like I said, I think that back in the day, it was, when this was done, it was sort of envisioning, was thinking of the retail areas a little more, but I think now I'm not sure we're gonna look to transform those office areas into into urban areas, but maybe portions of it, like if we have another node of activity over there. But here's what we heard from the survey. So some of the priorities we heard from the survey, as well as the commercial group, were, like I said, there's a lot of interest in having more access to neighborhood serving retail and services and opportunities for smaller, more localized shops and businesses. So that's something to consider for these areas that could differentiate a little more from the larger retail areas. There's some of that now in the shops area and even at the retail center, but maybe a little more boutique kind of localized businesses could be a good idea. It could also help amenitize remaining office uses. And continued enhancements and improvements to the recreation open space. That's something that can always be, because the original development, did the heavy lifting of building out the roadway systems, the pond network, and all that. I think now as we move forward in redevelopment, that's a good opportunity to focus on some of enhancing these quality of life features like the trail network and the open space areas, amenities, and really, and that'll, like I said, that'll make the office more marketable and make it a better place to live and all those great things. Like I said, so some of this locating this stuff so it can support any employment uses that remain is a good idea. As always, preserving and protecting natural areas. So I didn't really mention that before. There's these design guidelines, which are more of the sort of implementation part of the plan, but there are design guidelines that we utilize, like when we did the rezoning or the plan amendment and the rezoning last year for that new site. We use those design guidelines pretty heavily during that process. And they emphasize aspects like maintaining the buffering along the roadways. And a key one is trying to limit development to already developed areas, like either redevelopment of existing buildings or parking areas, and not encroaching farther into open space areas. So those are all great, and we'll look at those design guidelines as we move forward and see if those need to be supported anymore. But there's already a pretty good base there for that. So that's something to mention. Like I said, there could be a little more focus on pedestrian safety. So all these priorities, I think the idea here would be to translate these into those either a guiding principle or redevelopment goals. So the guiding principles are more just sort of like I said, the foundation of Fair Lakes and the values of Fair Lakes, where some of these are, this could be both probably, but one of our goals for redevelopment could be specifically to make safer pedestrian realm or something along those lines. We want to eventually focus in on the goals we really want to prioritize in the next portions of the study. So flexibility for uses to respond to market conditions, retaining elements to define to the character, all these things. So this is another one where I'll invite any kind of input on this too. And if you don't feel like doing it now, I'm going to post this meeting video and the presentation online after the fact, and I'm always welcome to email me with any other ideas as we move forward. And this is just the sort of first meeting, and we'll have other opportunities, but and I'll explain the process coming up here in a minute. So I'll pause just briefly. Or I can I'll go ahead and explain the next steps and I'll make it more clear, I guess. And then that'll be the end of the presentation and we can discuss as needed. So this is stage 2. Like I said, the idea here was to focus on the vision. And then the next stage, basically the idea here is for staff to prepare. So hopefully we'll get some consensus here on focusing on certain redevelopment areas and then prepare some sort of conceptual plan alternatives for these different areas, at least a couple for each area, just at a conceptual level, including, the necessary infrastructure and amenities, that's where we can sort of try out if there's different ideas on what might work in this area. We could work up a couple of concepts of different possibilities. And then when we get to that point, we'll have another series of meetings and we can review the results of those with some sort of real high level analysis of use and impacts and things. And then the idea there after that feedback, then we sort of refine into sort of work towards preferred alternatives, bring out if there's consensus on what looks like it's going to work in these areas. And at that point, somewhere in that range, or preferably a little before that, we need to return some of these to county agencies to have them review the sort of impacts, like well, that's one thing I didn't really even mention here too much. We have at least Kyle Kelly here from Department of Transportation. One of the reasons, like I said, for the study taking so long to get going is we had to get some funding to get a transportation analysis done. And it is in the works. They have a consultant they're working with, scoping it out and getting it going. It's still going to take a little while to get that analysis, get results of that analysis. So the first thing we'll get is a little better idea of the existing functionality of the roadway system and at the base plan level. And then as we get into these scenarios, at some point we'll need to test the impacts and see if there's limitations that we need to look at as far as limitations of the system or improvements that would need to happen. But like I said, there's a lot of approved office intensity out there, that there's a lot that could be done with rethinking that existing intensity that would maybe not necessarily add impacts. It would just change the nature of them. It'd be less office traffic, peak hour office traffic, and maybe more spread out different times of day or things like that. But we need to look at some of those scenarios and look at the impacts. There would be an impact on schools. Like I said, that's another thing that needs to be addressed. But so before we get to a final alternative, we need to compare the impacts of the different scenarios and work towards the preferred alternative. And then, like I said, as always, we'll have a couple more chances to review those more specific details at that point. So that's the next stage, and then I think the idea for the next meeting or so would be, originally we're thinking late October. So late October, early November for the next, follow-up, which would be halfway through stage 3 or so, and keep working along that time frame. So I think that's that's all I have for the presentation. But like I said, I'd love to hear any feedback, and we could return to any of the previous slides if we need to, or ideas, or if it's just informational, that's great. If that was the main point, is to. All right, yeah, we got a comment that's thanking me. That's great. And like I said, I'll post these materials online. Hopefully you guys can find the website. I could try to explain that, but I'll send some kind of note to the email list that the information's up there. So then, because there's almost 200 people on the email list. So there's a lot of people that weren't here today for sure. So that way folks can review this stuff after the fact.
Hey, Mike, it looks like Neil's got his hand up.
Okay,
Neil, go ahead.
Sure, go.
Hey, Mike, thanks for the detailed presentation. I appreciate you covering everything. This is very helpful. I guess you kind of covered both of the questions that I was coming up with over this throughout the presentation, but just to kind of get some clarity on it, at what point in the process, just for context, I'm a resident nearby. I'm directly adjacent to the Fair Lake Shopping Center. And I'm just kind of curious about when it comes to the redevelopment considerations for particularly, with anything regarding the more high density areas, at what point in the process do some of those studies regarding traffic impacts and to your other point earlier, the school impact studies, when do those come into effect?
I think during this study, like I said, we're doing a traffic analysis. We'll have a much better idea of that when we get the results. That'll be still several months out before we get, I guess, Kyle.
Hey, Mike. Yeah. Hey, good evening, everybody. This is Kyle Kelly with Fairfax County DOT. So I can provide a little bit of info about the transportation analysis that we'll be doing. So I guess just to start off, it's going to be multimodal. So we're going to look at not just vehicles, but we'll look at bike, ped, transit, and safety as well. So we'll do that for the existing conditions. We'll look at the baseline conditions and then any future development scenarios. So we'll be comparing the future scenarios to what the baseline comprehensive plan conditions are, and we'll do the full analysis of that. So we are going to be working with a consultant group for that. We're going to be getting them rolling on that analysis pretty soon here over the next month or so. And then they'll get started with their work. So it'll probably take a few months to get everything, but we'll get the existing conditions stuff first, and then we'll have them do the baseline. And then once we have any future development scenarios, we'll have them move into doing the analysis for that. So it'll kind of come in pieces as we move through the study, and we can always bring that information back to you all to give you once we get the existing, and then when we get the baseline and future conditions later on.
Great. Yeah, thanks. That's helpful. I figured that much. I wanted to kind of get a little clarity. And then my other question might not be as straightforward to answer, but I guess what I was just curious about was what is within the power of the study and the county in general, as far as encouraging some of the other level of businesses beyond the big box retail in the Fairfax, in this specific area that we're looking at with the study, to kind of focus on the development around more of the local regional. I think you use the word boutique, Michael, which I think is maybe getting at what I'm trying to get at here, because I think there's definitely a heavy lean. There's a lot of successful retail, obviously, in this area, but I think that tends to gear towards some more larger national, international chain. So what options are there to, ensure or encourage that with any of these future plans?
Yeah, so I think key to that is, that's why we have this commercial group too, is because we need to have buy-in from the folks who own or work with these properties and stuff. We don't want to plan something that it's not going to be implementable. But I think we can control some of that just by like the sort of nature and form of what is planned there, that we can get into that type, like, so a lot of it's just establishing a clear concept, I think, and a vision for what should be there, and that gets evaluated during a zoning process. I mean, we can't force folks to like develop a certain thing if they don't want to, but I think so. If we can come to consensus with those folks as to what makes sense, and come to agreement that, and have buy-in, then if we can just communicate that in the plan, so that, because there is multiple owners and there's other people that will be coming in the future. So we just want to have an established concept, basically, that will surely change over the years as stuff happens. But I think that's what we can do now anyway, is just try to establish the beginnings of that. I don't know if Graham has anything else to add on that, but that's my
Just
thinking
maybe,
about it.
yeah, I would agree with Mike, and maybe just one additional piece is when we're looking at residential development and we're looking at mixed use development, I think, Neil, to your point, getting different types of retail, maybe smaller retail spaces that are maybe kind of fewer chains, but more things that are smaller in scale, maybe more local. Some of that comes down to the form of the development too, which I think Mike's getting at. You think about a Fairfax Corner, for example, which is a very successful Peterson project just down the street, that has a really different character from the shopping center, obviously. And a part of that is because there's that concentration of mixed use within that given area. I think mixed use really works really well when you have lots of rooftops to be able to support it. And in terms of our planning, when we really kind of identify places where that can be a priority, not everywhere it can have one of these, these types of developments, but identifying the right spot for something like that, maybe something that builds on some of the existing successful shopping that's out there today. I think that's kind of one strategy that we could try through this study, is identifying where would it be ideal for there to be nodes of kind of mixed use activity and density to support it, recognizing that we don't want that everywhere, because if it's everywhere, it's not going to be successful. We want to make sure that it's concentrated and in very specific places where it makes sense.
And I mean, we do in the plan can sort of have the ability to control mix of uses to some extent. I mean, we can require that there be certain mixes of uses or certain diversity of uses. And then, but we should be helpful. Hopefully this is something we have to, as a challenge kind of, is work to incentivize. We want to be able to retain employment uses out there, not just replace them all with residential necessarily, and have it worth everyone's while to do that and to add these amenities. And retail uses. So there are ways we can try to do that in the plan. Like I said, can't just force development on folks, but we can, hopefully there's ways we can make it worth their while to want to do that. Everyone wants it to be a successful place. So, the problem is the past plan doesn't fit anymore, so it hasn't really been possible to even do that because it's an outdated plan based around the office park concept from 40, 50 years ago. So hopefully we can do something better or different.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Any other hands? I don't see any. Well, I guess we can call it into the meeting if no one has any questions. I don't want to cut everybody off, but seems like folks are content.
Mike, maybe you could drop your contact information into the
Yeah,
chat.
sorry about that. Yeah.
Oh no, you're good. Yeah, because
Yeah,
you're giving
he
people a
was-
lot of good information, but they might come up with something later on that they, as they're going away from the meeting, might want to contact you. So I think that'd be good.
And
if
like I
people have your
said,
contact
most of
already.
you might have been there already. If you can find or you can Google Fairfax County planning, or you could probably Google Fair Lake Study Phase 2, but find our website. If you can find our planning website, there's a comprehensive plan section, and look for current plan amendments and studies. And there's several different categories, but it's in there, Fair Lakes Phase 2, and there's just a website that has the contact info as well as meeting information and materials, upcoming meetings, and there's we should be uploading this recording to the county has a YouTube channel, and then we'll link to it from the website, and I'll put a PDF of the presentation on there as well. So that'll all be there. Yeah, there you go. There's the link. So if that's no further questions, I guess we can let you all go. Appreciate you coming, and feel free to direct any of your neighbors to the website. At least within a day or two, there'll be information there. So hopefully, like I said, the big purpose of this meeting was just to kind of clue everyone into what the study is and process and the background. So we'll get more into detailed content at the future meetings, probably in maybe 5-6 weeks or something like that. That rough time frame. All right. So thank you all for coming on a Wednesday night.
Thanks, Mike.
Appreciate it. Yep.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Good night.